All right, we are live. It is 6:02. Caucus is in session. Agenda, anyone with anything to add this evening? I'd just like to add line item number 5, employee carryover request, we'll call it. Anyone with anything additional to add? Fiscal officer's report?
Just the bills.
Okay. Council minutes, everyone either been emailed or received a hard copy? Tonight's legislation, everyone familiar with? Employee carryover request. In our ordinances, we do have it stated that employees can, upon council's approval, request to carry over vacation days up to 1 week. Mrs. Canada has requested to carry over 2 days from 2020 into 2021. I will motion that during my report. Are there any questions with regard to that ordinance?
Right, we just want to stay within our ordinances, and I'm sure it's not a problem with everybody, but just so we cross our T's and dot our I's.
Exactly. I like that line. All righty, it is 6:03. Caucus is closed.
All right, I'd like to call to order McDonald Village Council meeting for December 2nd, 2020. Roll.
Mr. Harvey,
Here.
Mr. Lewis,
Here.
Mr. Fisher,
Present.
Mr. DeZee,
Here.
Mr. Schmidt,
Present.
Mr. Joins.
Present.
Please stand for the
Pledge allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now I'll have a moment of silence for troops serving here and abroad, and also the Lord's Prayer if you so choose. Our
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Moving to approval of council meeting minutes for November 18th, 2020.
Move to approve as mailed.
Moved by Councilman Fisher to approve these as mailed. Discussion. Roll.
Mr. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. Harvey,
Aye.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. DeZee,
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt,
Aye.
Mr. Joins.
Aye.
Yeah, moving on to adoption of the agenda.
Move to adopt as is.
Moved by Councilman Fisher to adopt the agenda as is. Discussion. Roll.
Mr. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. Harvey,
Aye.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. DeZee,
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt,
Aye.
Mr. Joins.
Aye.
Yeah, moving on to the mayor's report. The only thing I have today is to just remind everybody to stay safe during the pandemic. Hopefully everyone's following the governor's orders, and I wish everybody a safe holidays. I hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving, and we're rolling into Christmas. Councilman Fisher is going to go a little bit more into detail about something the village is going to sponsor. And the Girl Scout troop is also going to possibly put on another event. But when we get more details, we're finalizing everything. We'll put them on our website. But like I said, Councilman Fisher will go into more details about the village-sponsored event. And that's all I have tonight. So moving on to report of village officials, village administrator, Mr. Dimitrovich.
Thank you, Mayor. Just making sure. Thank you. I have to report that our leaf season is coming to an end. Street Department employees will be out with the leaf vac machine one more time. Until Wednesday, December 9th. That will be the last day the machine will be on the road. Then we will take it apart and put it together to be a backup plow truck. And then if residents still have leaves and we have nice days after that, they would be encouraged to call our building. We will still pick them up in bags, but our priority then will be our snow plowing and maintenance on the road for bad weather. We will be out one more time again for branch pickups. So we noticed again that there was a lot of branches out from a windstorm we had a few weeks back. We haven't picked it all up yet, so we will continue to get that also into next week. But again, Wednesday, December 9th, we're looking to conclude with both of those until the spring. And we will advertise that on our board out front of the building here. And I did want to thank Chief Bill Woodley and Chief Stitt. I know Bill had come up with an idea that Mr. Fisher's going to talk about, and I was happy to work with them on it. And it looks like it's coming together to be I hope it's going to be a fun village event. So thanks for everybody who's working on it, especially Bill who thought of it. And that's all I have tonight, Mike.
Thank you. Comments or questions for Mr. Dimitrovich? Moving on to our police chief, Chief Woodley.
Thank you, Mayor. My activity report's been dispersed to everybody. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them. I spoke with McKinley Motors today. They expect our new SUV to be fully equipped and given back to us tomorrow. I have nothing further.
Thank you. Comments or questions for Chief Woodley? Moving on to our fire chief, Chief Stitt.
Thank you, Mayor. My report's been submitted. If anybody has any questions, I'll obtain them now. All right, move on.
Thank you. Comments or questions for Chief Stitt? Moving on to our solicitor, Mr. Ross.
Well, there's been some activity on the facility use agreement, but I will yield to Mr. Schmidt to report on that during service since he's carried the ball for us for the most part on that. Nothing else beyond that, but thanks.
Thank you. Comments or questions for Mr. Ross? Moving on to our President Pro Tem, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Mayor. We met this evening for Caucus at 6:02, closed at 6:03 to discuss the agenda, fiscal officer's report, council minutes, and tonight's legislation. Additionally, we have had a request by our fiscal officer, Ms. Canada, to carry over 2 vacation days from 2020 into 2021. So at this time, I'd like to motion that we approve that request to carry over 2 days from 2020 into 2021.
Moved by Councilman Lewis to approve Ms. Canada to carry over 2 days over into 2021. Discussion. Roll.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Harvey,
Aye.
Mr. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. DeZine,
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt,
Aye.
Mr. Joines.
Aye.
And that's all I had this evening, Mayor.
Yeah. Comments or questions for Mr. Lewis? Moving on to our Parks and Buildings Chair, Mr. Harvey.
Thank you, Mayor. We met here on Zoom last night at 6:03. We had no new business to bring up, and we closed at 6:05.
Yeah. Comments or questions for Mr. Harvey? Moving on to our Safety Chair, Mr. Fisher.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Safety met last evening on Zoom at 6 o'clock. Since that meeting, we have received the month-end report from Chief Woodley now that his computer systems are newly up and running. Chief Stitt also submitted his month-end report. Chief Stitt did come back from the Trumbull County Board of Health with the new COVID guidelines to relay that information to the administration so that we could follow all the updated information and take the necessary precautions. Hudson Radio has gotten some of our radios in. We're just waiting on some of the repeaters so that we can pretty soon put those into use and move over to that radio system. I know there's been a lot of talk over the last several months on that, so we're nearing completion. Our new cruiser is receiving all of the new package equipment. There was some of the equipment that hadn't come in yet due to shortages from COVID, but that'll be back in service here directly. As I already alluded to, the computer systems that we've been talking about at the police department have now been upgraded. They have been debugged and everything is operating as it should. And as you alluded to, Mayor, usually Mr. Harvey would bring you all the great and awesome news about our wonderful Christmas in the Village event that we have. And unfortunately this year he was, pretty bummed out to tell us that due to COVID restrictions, we weren't allowed to hold that event. Normally that would be in our parks and buildings. But our safety forces, both Chief Stitt and Chief Woodley and Administrator Dimitrovich came together and formulated a plan to have a parade with Santa Claus through the village. So hopefully a lot of the residents that would normally attend that event who were disappointed can bring out the kids and line the streets. And the police and fire department are going to escort Santa up and down most of the streets in McDonald. That event will be held on the 11th at 5:30 p.m. So we hope that everybody comes out and supports that. That's about the best we can do under the circumstances that we have. Unfortunately, we can't pass out candy canes, but at least all the kids can see Santa Claus. That's all I had, Mayor. If anybody has anything else, I'd be more than happy to entertain questions. Close that meeting.
Comments or questions for Mr. Fisher? Moving on to our Finance and Capital Improvements Chair, Mr. Lewis.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. We met last evening for finance via Zoom. We did discuss the 2021 first read of a permanent budget, which we did decide to add that third payment for the OPWC. So that is the one change this evening. That is basically taking the payment that was deferred for 2020 due to COVID and paying that in 2021. So that's the one change that is in there, and it is a first read this evening. We discussed the other piece of legislation this evening. We also discussed the account we have with Premier Bank that is going to be a non-interest bearing account come December 31st. Again, as I stated last evening, I'm still waiting for return phone calls from local institutions. I'm hoping to have some information for the 2nd December meeting to where we can possibly find another institution that can offer us an interest-bearing option for those funds. So there should be more to follow on that. And that is all we had with regard to finance last evening. That's it.
Thank you. Comments or questions from Mr. Lewis? Moving on to our Service Chair, Mr. Schmidt.
Thank you, Mayor. Service opened at 6:05. We did close at 6:10. A few things we discussed is we do have a second read of the revised user sewer rates. That will take care of tonight. We are still continuing to work with Nate Ogden for our employee healthcare benefit rates. And as Mr. Ross did mention, the facilities use agreement, they did have some questions, which I know Mr. Ross talked to Mr. Saganich today. They were able to work back and forth together today quickly with those few changes. And Mr. Ross did send that over to the school again for their approval and to sign and pass it at their next meeting this month. So for us, at our next meeting, I'll more than likely be able to motion to pass the resolution. We'll waive the 3-read process and just pass it. And then hopes that that is done with and we can move forward. And then the last thing, Thomas, if you want to expand on this with the gas aggregation letter that the village is going to be receiving for those community individuals that aren't already in that program.
Yeah, we have a broker, Nate Ogden from Buckeye Energy. He shops the market for us, and A lot of people in the village are already in the aggregation. We have a rate of $3.17 right now being quoted from Buckeye Energy through Constellation. And he will get a letter out. The letter will actually come from Constellation to our residents that have not yet enrolled. If you are enrolled, you probably won't get one. It is a opt-in program. And that letter should be coming out at the end of this month. So to help anybody out who likes to shop the market for natural gas and keeping their monthly rates down, if they have any questions, or they can come, or they can call our municipal building. We'll be happy to talk to them about why other companies might look like they're lower during off-peak times, but then we have to explain that during peak usage, which is the months we're in now, those rates creep up. But we're pretty well educated on the aggregation in our offices here with Peggy Palmer and Amy Cunningham. We can all talk about that with our residents and give them the best rate and help them make the best decision. So residents can look for that letter later this month.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's all I have.
Thank you. Comments or questions for Mr. Schmidt? Moving on to our planning commission representative, Mr. Fisher.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I have nothing to report this evening, and Planning Commission will not meet until after the new year, after the reorganizational meeting. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be more than happy to entertain them. Other than that, it's all yours.
Thank you. Comments or questions for Mr. Fisher? Moving on to our community chest representative, Mr. Dizzy.
Thank you, Mayor, but I have no report at this time.
Comments or questions for Mr. Dizzy? Seeing no remarks from persons of group present, seeing no old business, no new business. Moving on to legislation, legislation A.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have a third reading of a resolution transferring funds within various funds within the village of McDonald, Ohio for a period beginning January 1, 2020 and ending December 31, 2020.
Move to pass the third read.
Moved by Councilman Lewis to pass this as the third read. Discussion. Roll.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Harvey,
Aye.
Mr. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. DeZine,
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt,
Aye.
Mr. Joins.
Aye.
Moving on to legislation B.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have a second reading of an ordinance for the purpose of amending previous ordinance number 3176-15 to revise charges for the operation, maintenance, and replacement costs for the use of the village's wastewater treatment facility and sewage system effective September 1, 2020, which will be reflected in the fourth quarter of 2020 billing in January of 2021.
Move to pass the second read.
Moved by Councilman Schmidt to pass this as a second read. Discussion. Roll.
Mr. Schmidt,
Aye.
Mr. Harvey,
Aye.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. DeZine,
Aye.
Mr. Joins.
Aye.
And moving on to legislation C.
Thank you. We have an emergency reading of an ordinance to amend appropriations for 2020 to various divisions of the village government for each of the several objects for which the village of McDonald, Ohio has to provide out of the monies known to be in the treasury of said village during the year from the collection of all the taxes and from all other sources of revenue for 2020.
Move to suspend the rules of council.
Moved by Councilman Lewis to suspend the rules of council. Discussion. Roll.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Harvey,
Aye.
Mr. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. DeZine,
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt,
Aye.
Mr. Joins.
Aye.
Move to pass this as an emergency.
Moved by Councilman Lewis to pass this as an emergency. Discussion. Roll.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Harvey,
Aye.
Mr. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. DeZine,
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt,
Aye.
Mr. Joines.
Aye.
And moving on to legislation D.
Thank you. We have a first reading of an ordinance of appropriations for 2021 to various divisions of the village government for each of the several objects for which the village of McDonald, Ohio has to provide out of the monies known to be in the treasury of said village during the year from the collection of all the taxes and from all other sources of revenue for 2021.
Move to pass the first read.
Moved by Councilman Lewis to pass this as a first read. Discussion. Roll.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Harvey,
Aye.
Mr. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. DeZine,
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt,
Aye.
Mr. Joines.
Aye.
Moving on to the fiscal officer's report.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to take a minute to thank council for allowing those vacation days to be moved to next year. And then the last thing is that I, Lori Canada, fiscal officer for the village of McDonald, Ohio, do hereby declare that the bills are true and correct in the amount of $55,240.71, and the money is in the bank to pay them.
I move we accept the VFO's report and pay the bills.
Moved by Councilman Lewis to accept the VFO's report and pay all bills. Discussion. Roll.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Harvey,
Aye.
Mr. Fisher,
Aye.
Aye.
Mr. DeZine,
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt,
Aye.
Mr. Joines.
Aye.
Seeing nothing under miscellaneous.
Motion to adjourn.
Moved by Councilman Harvey to adjourn. Discussion. Roll.
Mr. Harvey,
Aye.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Mr. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. DeZine,
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt,
Aye.
Mr. Joines.
Aye.